Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and today I am joined with Dwain McFarland from PFF and Amr Gabr from RotoViz and 4for4. Right now, there are so many polarizing players out there in fantasy football, and we are going to dive into a bunch of them today. After a smoking hot end-of-season finish, is Amon-Ra St the real deal? Cole Kmet right now is the presumed number 2 pass-catching option on the Chicago Bears, and you can draft him as tight end 18. Is that a great value or is it a trap? After face-planting as a rookie, Zach Wilson has been surrounded with talented weapons that should help him step up in year 2. Are you buying into it? Should you buy into it? We're going to dive into all these players today with 2 of the sharpest guys in the industry, so be sure to check this episode out. Was Amon-Ra St. Brown's breakout last year the real deal? That and so much more coming up on today's episode of The Launchpad. Dwain, go ahead and start us off here. Right now, Amon-Ra St. Brown is getting drafted as the wide receiver 34 after a phenomenal end-of-season breakout. Is it something that you're buying into for the 2022 season?
Yeah, I am buying into it. And it's just because mostly, historically what I like to look at like over anything is just really talent. And yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown coming in did not have the draft capital, where we would typically be like, oh my God, we're really going to love this guy the next year. But I went back into the study this offseason, just really looking at PFF receiving grade. And if you look at the group of players that graded 75 or greater, and Amon-Ra St. Brown graded out as an 80, here's your list of receivers to do that since 2011. Odell Beckham Jr., Terry McLaurin, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Doug Baldwin, Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jarvis Landry, Hunter Renfrow, Tyler Lockett, and A.J. Green. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely buying in. Do I think he's going to get 30% of the targets? No. But do I think he's probably a 22% target share guy, even with all the other guys there? Yes, because I believe that talent, continues on. And look, the last thing I'll say is this, like we see players all the time get this kind of opportunity. Oh, there's nobody else there to get the targets, yet they don't seize it, right? You still have to be good enough to earn the target. So because of that reason alone, I still like Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I love the fact that his ADP is actually coming down.
And I was just about to say that, I was on a warpath against Amon-Ra St. Brown at the end of the season, but at the time he was getting drafted as a top 20 dynasty receiver. And I just thought that was way too rich for it. And now that he's kind of dropped down to a place that I think is kind of reasonable. I think that wide receiver 3 output is what we should expect for him, and getting drafted as wide receiver 34, I think is actually a pretty good value. Between one quick question, and I've got the perfect guy on the show for this. We hear a lot about his PFF grade, and he had a great PFF grade, and you being over at PFF, can you kind of explain to us what goes into those grades a little bit and how you guys take the objectivity out of the grading?
Yeah. So, we've got a team of people, right, that are, they've got a book, and it's basically how to grade all this stuff, right? They go through all this training and everything, and they're charting everything, and different teams chart different things. There's not one guy that has to chart everything in a game, right? This particular, analyst may just be looking at receivers, right? And so they get really good at just charting that sort of thing. And so the way it really works, the shorter the reception or the target, right, the less credit the receiver gets, right? And they take into consideration like it's 3rd and 7, right? And they throw the ball 3 yards down the field because nobody cares, right? Everybody's backed off in coverage. Like that is not worth as much as catching a ball on 3rd and 7 at the 8 yards down the field to get the first down. So it's really about trying to also get rid of noise, right? We don't want to be giving players the same amount of credit for plays that don't matter just because the defense is giving it up. So essentially what happens is if you're getting targeted shorter down the field, like that's less positive for your grade. The further you go down the field, the more that becomes, valuable, just like it would be to your team, right? When you look at EPA and things like that.
Now, I didn't want to, make that come off like I was pushing against what PFF's doing. I know that you guys do.
No, I didn't take it.
So I just wanted to explain that to the audience a little bit because
those and that's PFF a very simple
are
version.
The real deal. Yeah. Yeah. So much goes into that. And I love PFF grades. I am an elite subscriber myself. I recommend anybody that is looking to get into fantasy analysis, just taking it a little bit deeper, go ahead and sign up for that.
As I tell my kids, Dave, question everything. Question everything. Yeah. It's okay to question PFF grades. You're not making me mad.
Exactly.
I question them. Like I go to our charters all the time and be like, hey man, I was just watching this because they've taught me how to watch it. I've done that. I've gone and said, look, like we said that he was wide open on this play. I don't think he's wide open. I think he's covered. So we're constantly having those sort of conversations.
And PFF grades, I mean, that is the staple for my argument for Damian Harris. So I'm going to continue using PFF grades
Use it where you
as
want.
much as I can. Exactly. But Amr, before we get into introductions, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you are feeling about Amon-Ra St. Brown? Like Dwayne said here, I mean, he really took advantage of an opportunity when TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift were both hurt. Do you think that that can still work out next year with Jamison Williams, DJ Chark, and these new additions, or do you think that he just completely falls off the map?
I'm going to try my best to follow up on Dwayne's footsteps because I mean, the man's a dad savant. But what I did essentially, I looked up Amon-Ra St. Brown's in two halves essentially. So the first half and second half of the season. The first half I made it at weeks 1 through 9. Because from weeks 1 through 9, you never saw a snap share of 80% or higher. So essentially that indicates maybe it's 70% of the cutoff. I mean, I was picky with my stats, so of course it's going to show Amon-Ra St. Brown in a good light. But so essentially from those weeks 1 to 9, he never saw more than 80% snap share. But he also saw 8 games of more than 60% snap share. But from essentially weeks 1 to 9, he saw 8 PPR points per game, 4.4 receptions per game, 5.71 targets per game, and 35.71 yards per game. But when TJ Hawkinson went out, when everyone went out, essentially, and Amon-Ra St. Brown went crazy. He saw 19.48 PPR points per game, 7.22 receptions per game, almost a full touchdown per game, 9.22 targets per game, and 73 yards per game. He's overall for the season, gave us 119 targets, which was more than Marvin Jones, Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Kyle Pitts, A.J. Brown, and Chase Claypool. His yards per route run was also 1.9, which is the same as Jalen Waddle, who everyone has as a top 8 wide receiver in Dynasty right now. Kyle Pitts, Jalen Waddle, Terry McLaurin, Keenan Allen, and Deontay Johnson. But the one negative that I had about him, even though he went crazy, he still didn't go over 1,000 yards, and he played almost 16 to 17 games, which just showed Amon-Ra St. Brown's maybe not his depth of target, but maybe he's more of a shallow player. But I'm still very in on his breakout for sure.
Yeah, and I think that, you highlighted so many good points there about what makes him so polarizing, because you really have this kind of tale of 2 seasons with Amon-Ra St. Brown where, he was doing what you'd expect from a day 3 rookie for the first half of the season, exploded in the second half of the season, and we're trying to figure out, is he here, there, somewhere in the middle, and really we're not going to find out until season, and that's what makes this so fun. But what I want to do today is focus on so many more of these polarizing players, guys that are in new positions, guys that just have wild standard deviations across different rankers, and that's what we are going to focus on today. Last week, what we did is focus on teammates that had similar ADPs. I was joined with JJ Zacharyson and Alex Caruso. Phenomenal show. I recommend you go check that one out. It was a ton of fun. Today, though, I'm joined with Dwain McFarland and Amr. I always get it wrong. Amr. And we are going to dive into the 2020 season by taking a look at more polarizing players like Amon-Ra St. Brown. Before we get into those, though, let me do some quick introductions here. Dwain McFarland over at PFF. Seriously, you got to follow this guy on Twitter if you aren't already. Watching the show on the Footballguys YouTube channel, you are probably familiar with him. He is Dwayne, what you've been on Sig's show probably 6 or 7 times now. I feel like I see you on there pretty frequently.
I don't think I've been on that many times. I've been on Sig's show several times, and then I do a lot with Waldman, as well,
Yeah.
with his stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty in, plugged in, and then now doing stuff with you. I hang out with a lot of the football guys.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I don't think it's out of line to call Dwayne a friend of the Footballguys at this point. But Dwayne, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, whether it be Twitter, TikTok. I'm not sure where you're at nowadays, what you're working on for the offseason and all that fun stuff.
Man, I have a TikTok account, but I don't ever record anything. I just don't. But for Twitter's where you can find most of my stuff, it's at Dwain McFarland, DWAIN MCFARLAND. Of course, you can find me over at Pro Football Focus. Constantly putting up rankings, tiers. I'm working on a research article right now around breakout receivers, so I'm pretty interested to talk about some of these guys we have coming up. And then, of course, I record 3 to 4 podcasts a week with Ian Hartitz. And then I have kind of a side podcast I do with Brian Drake, my co-host, which is called the Fantasy Football Hustle, which was kind of the first thing I really did to get into this industry. And we started it 5 years ago. We had 2 people, I think, listening in basements somewhere. And now a lot of people download it and like it. So we record that usually 1 time per week.
Yeah, and everyone's got to get started somewhere, but Dwayne has been blowing up these last couple of years, and easily, as far as Twitter follows go, you're not going to get any sort of subjectivity here. I mean, he is just spitting cold, hard facts every single day on Twitter. Definitely recommend checking that out. Good stuff. Also joined here with Amr, who was actually the first guest ever on the Launchpad 34 episodes ago with Taylor Cornell, and we've got him back now. At the time, You had just come out with your first article, Amr, and now you're over at
Yeah.
RotoViz. You're over at 4for4. You're growing in the industry. You got just a ton of content out there nowadays. Let everyone know where they can find you and what you're working on this offseason.
I'm not as big as you guys yet. I'm trying to get there. But where you can find my content is at 4for4. My Twitter name is AMRGABR. I'm working right now. I'm doing a research article right now on Underdog to look at weeks 15 through 17 because those are the playoff weeks. Those are like the most important weeks essentially because those are the weeks where you're going to advance, get into that pool of 470. So I'm looking at our running back backfields that we want to target for those weeks that you essentially want to have. Because essentially, if you get your running back targets right during that week and they have those blow up games, the rest of your team is going to look very solid. So I'm trying to see which running backs I'll be one of those weeks. That's something I'm working on right now. I'm going to probably doing a lot of best ball content this offseason, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm taking a very different dynasty approach this year where I'm just punting on running backs in all of my startups and trying to get into that streaming running backs during the season a little bit. So I'll be sure to check that one out. But anyway, we got a ton to talk about today. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to stick with receivers. And when I'm talking about ADP in this show, I'm going to be talking about underdog ADP. Right now, they just have extremely sharp ADP with the amount of best ball drafts going on. And I want to talk about Brandon Aiyuk, who is currently ranked as the wide receiver 40. Another guy who got off to a very slow start in the season, had a boom at the end of the season, and actually did that in back-to-back years, but for very different reasons. So Amr, start us off here. He was the wide receiver 16 from week 9 onward last year. How are you feeling about him going into next season?
I mean, I think the reason why he had such good weeks from week 9 and on, essentially, is because Deebo Samuel went from a receiver to a wide back. So essentially, he was playing the backfield more often. And then the 49ers saw that happen, and then they went out and drafted Danny Gray in the 3rd round of this year's NFL draft. Danny Gray is more he kind of him and Brandon Aiyuk kind of take away the same part of the field, essentially deep threats, long ball specialists. Because I think Deebo Samuel and George Kittle eat up the middle of the field. Elijah Mitchell doesn't really get that many dump offs, that many passes. So I feel like Brandon Aiyuk and Danny Gray kind of will siphon off each other. If I was drafting right now and I had a value, I'd rather take Danny Gray later on, which I think he's run 15, 16 right now, than take Brandon Aiyuk around 7, 8.
Yeah, I don't hate that at all. I mean, a lot of people are pivoting for the cheaper options. And every time I've been on a show in the last couple of months and San Francisco gets brought up, I say the same thing. Like, we could spend an entire hour just talking about San Francisco with Trey Lance taking over, Deebo kind of seeing his role switch, Brandon Aiyuk being in the doghouse for the beginning of the year. But Dwain, why don't you go ahead and kind of walk us through what you're expecting with San Francisco and Brandon Aiyuk specifically this season?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for Aiyuk, Armor already really hit some of them. The big thing is Deebo and the switch in his role. So I think that makes it problematic. But I think what you're getting with a player like Aiyuk, I have him in the same tier as Garrett Wilson, Sky Moore, Chris Olave, Kadarius Toney, Chase Claypool, Christian Watson. These are all guys that we have questions about, but we know that they have upside. Brandon Aiyuk, oh, by the way, cleared that 80 grade as well, like we talked about with Amon-Ra St. Brown earlier, as in his rookie year. You didn't hear him on the list that I gave you because I was only going through 2019, because those were guys that we had enough time in the league to actually look and say, wow, is this data point worth anything? But Aiyuk is a very talented player. Problem is he plays on a run-first offense. We've got questions about his quarterback, but everything else screams talent. Like his yards per route run are fine. His targets per route run, not elite, but they're good enough, right? And the fact that his efficiency is still pretty strong, it's just the offense he lives in and the questions that we have. So I like to treat wide receivers like that really as upside wide receiver fours, right? You're not really going to want to have them in your lineup to start the season, but the season can go a lot of freaking ways and a lot of things can happen. And so if you can get the right ADP on these guys, and you can get them as a talented player and you let the season unfold and then you figure out, are they going to go in your lineup? And if we're talking underdog, doesn't matter. Best ball, that's the beauty, right? You can still take advantage of the spike weeks that Aiyuk can give you. And if something happens to Deebo, if something happens to Kittle, then you're still going to get the upside. As far as Danny Gray goes, I like him, but he's a later round pick. Like, I'm just not that excited about what I think Gray will bring to the table. I think that Aiyuk is still a clearly, much more talented player. Now, you have to pay a lot more for him, right? His underdog, the underdog I have, I hadn't updated since like a few days ago, but I had 40. So I've already forgot what you said, Dave. But I think 40 is
right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I have him ranked 43 and his ADP is 40. So I'll probably be even to market on my exposure to Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah, and it's such an overused cliche at this point, but he is like the definition of somebody who is going to be better in best ball than he is in managed leagues. Like you said, with those spike weeks, it's going to be tough to predict. I mean, it's tough to predict season wide, let alone week to week when his spike weeks are going to come. So he's a guy that I like targeting at his ADP just because we know he's amazingly talented, and the only thing working against him right now is his situation. Let's talk about another guy, though, who has shown some flashes and might be getting overdrafted, but also has a sky high ceiling right now. And I want to talk about Gabe Davis. Now, Gabe Davis is a guy that I love as a player, but it seems like his value skyrocketed after that playoff game. 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in one of the best playoff games we have ever seen. And now, all of a sudden, despite never cracking an 11% target share, he is getting drafted as the wide receiver 27. Dwain, how are we feeling about Gabe Davis at that ADP?
For me at this point, I'm okay with it. I was against it before the NFL draft. Like I just wasn't any kind of fantasy drafts I was doing before the NFL draft. I was just avoiding Gabe Davis because I just felt there's too much of a chance based on the visits and everything and just the roster makeup for the Bills that they could take a receiver that could really bump Gabe Davis down the pecking order. But that did not happen. They did not spend a high draft pick. And so I think the way you have to look at Gabriel Davis now, I've got him in a tier with Elijah Moore, Darnell Mooney, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Drake London, but for different reasons. The other 4 guys that I just named, their talent profiles are better than Gabriel Davis. And so when I think about talent profiles, I think of 2 things. One, first, and the most important is your ability to create targets. You already talked about it a little bit, Dave, and the 11% target share really being his highest. But whenever you really dig in to like just when he's on the field, which last year, if you go back and I know you got to include the playoffs, but you look at when he really became a starter and got to play all the time with the Bills, and you start to look at his targets per route run, even if he doesn't improve, his targets per route run were 18% last year, right? That's slightly below what we would expect from a wide receiver 3 over the last 3 years in the NFL. That would be 21% is the average. He's at 18%, so he's below that. Here's the thing, though. He plays in a great offense that's going to throw the ball as much as any other team in the league. And last year, like if you look at Gabe Davis and you look at his routes per dropback, how low they were. But once he got to that 80-85% mark, he started to clip off wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3. Obviously, he had the huge wide receiver 1 finish. And so he doesn't even have to improve. He could stay an 18% targets per route player and just get to see the 85% of the routes because I don't see a way he doesn't get there, right? We know Stephon Diggs is going to be out there all the time. Crowder's a slot player, right? Isaiah McKenzie is a slot player. If we look at Khalil Shakir, he is really a slot player as well. So I think they intend to let Gabe Davis be on the field 85 to 90% of the time. So even if he doesn't take a step forward as a talent and his ability to demand targets, at this point, like he's worth a shot at that spot. Now, what if Gabriel Davis actually improves? So last year, once they made him the starter, he became a 21% targets per route player. So if he were to actually do that and get to play as many plays as Buffalo does, like he's going to be hard for him not to finish as a wide receiver 18. So this is a player that I've swung a long way on now that the Bills have not addressed the position through the draft and just looking at the makeup, of the roster. I think basically you're getting him, like his comps are not great to your point, Dave. So like Devin Funchess, there's a lot of guys, Torrey Smith is in his comp group when I just comp his talent. So I want people to understand, I'm not saying there's not a floor. There is. Gabriel Davis could still just completely, fall on his face this season. But I think where he's going, as a mid-range to high-end wide receiver 3, given the offense that he plays in and what we saw towards the end of last season, I think it's still worth it because I think there's upside from there. He could be top 18 receiver. He could just be average, do what he's supposed to do, and finish in that range that you're drafting him. Of course, there is the downside that he could just be another Torrey Smith.
Right. And where we're drafting him now, it's almost like you're betting on him to be an outlier, given what he's done at this point in his career. You're expecting him to take that huge leap forward, but we still aren't drafting him anywhere near his potential ceiling. I mean, if he takes that huge step forward that people are expecting, he becomes the go-to wide receiver 2 in Buffalo. I mean, wide receiver 1 is within his range of outcomes, but like you said, that floor is just dangerous to be spending a pick that high on. Amr, walk us through your thought process a little bit, though. How are you feeling about Gabe Davis, where he's getting drafted at that kind of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 turn?
Basically, what Dwayne already said. I mean, he hit on the head like as well as you can do. But Gabriel Davis, like he said, target per route run last 2 years, 13-18%. Yards per route run, actually, he went up from 1.29 to 1.62. But I also saw that so one of my favorite stats to look at is like how many first downs you gain per target. So like it's a good way or a good stat to show how much does a team trust you when they're trying to get a first down? How much does a team trust you like when they're trying to move the ball essentially? And one thing that Gabe Davis did really well at, he got 47% of his targets, which only 10 players last year had a higher first down per target share. But the one thing that I don't like about Gabriel Davis is he only saw 146 yards after contact, and I think the Bills After drafting Khalil Shakir, they're trying to get J.D. McKissick last year. I think they want to get players that are good after the catch, like they want players that are essentially that will gain yards by themselves. Because last year, actually, Josh Allen, his passing efficiency actually went down for the first time since his because we've all been accustomed to Josh Allen absolutely crushing. But last year his passing efficiency actually went down. So maybe the Bills are being proactive and forward thinking, and maybe getting more players that can do more with the ball in their hands. Because last year it was Cole Beasley, Isaiah McKenzie, Gabriel Davis, and Stephon Diggs. And Stephon Diggs was the only one Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley were the only ones they could really trust to gain yards after the catch. So I like Gabriel Davis at his price, but I think I might be, because even Dane Brugler, I was doing a lot of draft podcast notes, comp Khalil Shakir to a discount Deebo Samuel. So if you can get a guy out there who can catch the ball, gain yards after the catch, kind of make it life easy on Josh Allen instead of Josh Allen threading those needles, because we saw in the playoff game, those are absolute laser rockets to Gabriel Davis when he was catching those touchdowns. It was threading the needle perfectly. So I'm in on Gabriel Davis, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Bills don't take as many deep shots as we're accustomed to.
Now we've talked about the Buffalo Bills passing game for a few minutes now, and neither of you mentioned Jamison Crowder. Am I the only person that thinks that Jamison Crowder is going to be able to walk into a pretty substantial role? I mean, this is a guy who, when he's healthy, basically locks himself in for 100 targets a season. He's stepping into the role that Cole Beasley has vacated, where he saw 100-plus targets for 3 straight years. Dwayne, looking at this depth chart and looking schematically, do you think that they're just going to kind of slot out or push out the slot receiver role, or do you think that Jamison Crowder is somebody that we should be a little bit intrigued with in this offense?
No, I think they still want to use the slot role. I think there is something to be determined this year in training camp in Buffalo, right? And I think it could be that they use more 12 personnel. They've already got Dawson Knox. They added O.J. Howard in the offseason. So I think this is the first year in a few years where I think it's going to be kind of up for grabs. Might they change their offense a little bit, right? As far as what kind of personnel that they use, because we have questions around Crowder being a little bit of an older player. You have questions around Shakir as a rookie. Isaiah McKenzie's never had a full-time role. Gabriel Davis, we just talked about there being question marks with. So, right, we could see less 10 personnel, from Buffalo, or those guys could all crush it in training camp, and we see it all the time. But to really hit on the question, that you're asking, I really like Crowder. I've got him right now ranked inside my top 60. But just looking at the offense that he sits in, you look at his targets per route run, over his career, he can be around a 20% guy. So I mean, he's not quite as good as what we've seen from Cole Beasley, in Cole Beasley's best years, but Crowder's right there. And to your point, just talking about the way the offense looks right now, what if Gabe Davis does face plant, right? What if Dawson Knox, who also was propped up by value last year, earning targets per route run, Dawson Knox was not great. He was kind of living off the fumes of Josh Allen being awesome and this offense throwing the ball so much. There's a chance Crowder could be the number 2 option on the team. I totally think that that's within the range of outcomes. And he's really one of my favorite picks later in drafts, just because of what you're talking about. Even if they have to run more 12 personnel or do some of these other things, there's a chance Crowder could, be on the field 80%, of the passing plays for the Bills. That's a lot, in an offense that throws as many passes as the Bills do.
Yeah, this could be a weird offense where they kind of take the wide receiver 2 by committee approach, where Stephon Diggs is just the unquestioned alpha, and then there isn't a really clear-cut wide receiver 2. Love talking about this. I could talk about Gabe Davis and Jamison Crowder and the Buffalo Bills offense all day, but let's go on to the next guy. And this is Mike Evans, who I think that we were, a couple months ago, I thought that we were way too high on him when I saw him getting drafted as a wide receiver 1. But the deeper I dive into this, I'm warming up to him at his ADP, and I have been drafting him a little bit right now. It has been 6 years since he finished above wide receiver 8. He had that 2016 season when he finished as a wide receiver 2 and smashed. Since then, he kind of floats around as a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. So I'm wondering, are we drafting him at his ceiling this year with him being the wide receiver 9 off the board? Amr, start us off here. Mike Evans, are we drafting him too high, or is he going in a good spot?
I think it's maybe a little bit of both. Because Mike Evans, since Chris Godwin got drafted to the Buccaneers, he's played 69 games with Chris Godwin. He's averaged 15.85 PPR points per game, about 5 receptions a game, about a touchdown, 8 targets per game, and almost 75 yards per game. And then without Chris Godwin, it's at 17.02 PPR points per game, 5 receptions, almost 10 targets a game, and almost 78 yards per game. But he's always been a low yards after the catch player, so we really can't expect that to change going into year 9. We also can't assume that Chris Godwin comes in and hits the ground running. I mean, ACL injuries have advanced in recent years, But I mean, I think his injury happened in week 11 or 12 last year. So I mean, we're assuming we're doing a lot of assumptions and a lot of hurdles to think that Chris Godwin will come back and just hit the ground running like we assume. And I think Mike Evans for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season could absolutely have like 30% target share and absolutely smash, especially if Gronk doesn't come back, because we're expecting Leonard Fournette to still get his targets. We don't know about Rashad White. I'm not in on the Rashad White boat steam yet. But I think Mike Evans would be a good pick for the first 5 weeks. Maybe flip him after that and then get a good return on that.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the ACL recoveries. I just got to point it out yesterday. I don't know if you guys saw this video going around, but Robert Woods, 5.5 months removed from an ACL tear at 30 years old, and he was running around on the field yesterday. I mean, the recoveries now are just incredible. So I don't even know if you can discount the option that Chris Godwin might be back early in the season. But Dwayne, how are we feeling about Mike Evans here, going as a wide receiver 8, or was it wide receiver 8 or wide receiver 9? Wide receiver 8 off the board. How are we liking that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you why Mike Evans is going this high, and it's less to do with Mike Evans and the fact that Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, DJ Moore, and DK Metcalf, everybody is scared to freaking death of their situations, right? Those are young, talented players that have demanded targets. They've shown us for multiple years that they're badasses. Can I say that? Sorry, Joe. I think I have to say sorry, Joe. If I
You
say
got
that.
the sorry, Joe.
So,
you are a friend of football guys through and through. You know the deal.
Yeah, so when I look at those receivers, they should all be ahead of Mike Evans, right? But when you take situation, and if folks want to look at this, you can go over to PFF. I just put up an article last week with all my wide receiver tiers, and I'm really taking this scientific approach of, okay, we're going to look at everything. Can you create targets? Can you do something afterwards with your targets? And then, how does your team situation play out? Are you a pass heavy team? Do you have a quality quarterback? All these things, right? It's all based off of stuff that I've tried to narrow down to being the more sticky things that we can really depend on. But anyway, folks can go check that out. But Mike Evans, normally, like if I were just, saying, hey, based on wide receiver thresholds and what, say a wide receiver, what we would expect from a wide receiver 9 over the past 10 years, would I rank him as a wide receiver 9? No, I wouldn't, but he's getting pushed up in the market because of all the questions we have around the players behind him. You even have him going ahead of Jalen Waddle because why? Tyreek Hill landed with the Dolphins, right? People are still scared of Michael Pittman because they think, what? Pass heavy offense with the Colts. AJ Brown lands on a team with the Eagles, and Mike Evans right now is going 1 pick ahead of AJ Brown. AJ Brown, more talented player, but on a potentially run-heavy offense with 2 other mouths to feed and Dallas Goedert, right, and Devonta Smith. So that's really what's pushing Mike Evans up the board. I will just give the quick cautionary tale. I think Amr really did a good job of explaining like what it could be like those first few weeks. Like in fact, like last year, I think it was week 15 actually where Godwin left. So in his target share in games minus Godwin, 23%. Mike Evans scored 14.7, 26.9, 26.7, and 25.9 points. Those include the playoff games. So there's obviously, an opportunity there. But guess what? When that happened, Evans got to kick inside some. He was getting to play some from the slot. So they were moving him around. They weren't just sending him downfield. Because here's the thing with Brady. Since he's gotten there, Brady's actually, the targets per route run and all that have come down with Evans because Brady does not like to force the ball deep whenever he's facing like cover 3 in zone, cover 4 in zone. He doesn't want to force the ball in against 2, defenders. So what he does is when he sees he's got single man outside, where does he go? He goes to Mike Evans. That's his favorite target. Well, here's the problem. How much man coverage do we really see in the NFL these days? About 30% of the time you're in a route, you see man. The rest of it is all zone. And so that's where Godwin's routes come in. That's where Russell Gage's routes are going to come in. That's where Gronk working against, the tight ends and the safeties come in. So, I mean, if you just look over the last few years, the targets per route run, mainly where the drop has happened is in man coverage. Mike Evans is not seeing as many targets anymore. And then you just have the fact that, he's getting older. Right. I mean, it's just the way it goes. We've got a player that's going into their age 29 season, so with Evans, he'll be 29.1 when the season starts. But again, like just looking at this, so targets per route run have gone down from 23% to 19% to 18%. Yards per route run have gone down from 2.30 to 1.79 to 1.65. So we really have a talented veteran that's been doing it for a long time, but he would be much better as like a mid-range wide receiver 2, but the market is pushing him up. The one caveat I would give, like, look, things can happen really fast whenever these players hit this cliff. And these are just guidelines. We can't say, look, when a player hits 30, like they're going to drop. Like some of them drop at 29. Like some of them don't fall off the cliff until 31. Like it's not a perfect science, but the guidelines say he's in the range now where we could see that drop be even bigger. And he's already shown signs of it. So that's my biggest challenge with drafting Evans so early. Honestly, my pivot isn't to one of those receivers that I named with the talent. Usually it's a pivot at that point. Like, is there a running back that I like better than Mike Evans, or is there an elite tight end? And that's usually where I'm pivoting off of Mike Evans and that range that he's going in, to one of the running backs or to one of the tight ends that I like.
Yeah, I'm with you. Give me Joe Mixon, give me DeAndre Swift, Mark Andrews. If I could take one of those guys over Mike Evans, I am.
All
And
those.
and it's kind of bizarre this year because you see these top 5 wide receivers are kind of your like bona fide wide receiver ones. Nobody's arguing that top 5. And then you look at like wide receiver 6 through 25, and every single wide receiver has some sort of question mark, be it age, quarterback play, team situation, new team, whatever it is. This is going to be a pretty tough year to really nail those mid-round wide receivers. But Dwayne, one of the guys you mentioned was DK Metcalf, and I want to talk about him because, halfway through the 2020 season, this guy was everybody's dynasty wide receiver 1, and then he was ice cold down the stretch in 2020. 2021, we see some boomer bust tendencies, and he finishes the season as a wide receiver 2, and then he loses Russell Wilson. I mean, it has just been beat after beat after beat for DK Metcalf, but now he's getting drafted wide receiver 19, which is the lowest we have seen him in a long time. Amr, start us off here. Talk a little bit about DK Metcalf. Is he a value?
Yeah, of course.
Valued, or what are we thinking?
I understand DK Metcalf, and like I think DK Metcalf has great measurables. He's a freak athlete. He's got there's a lot of good things going for DK Metcalf, and I think it was also propped up by Russell Wilson's amazing deep ball efficiency and efficiency as a quarterback overall. The one thing that when I did a lot of DK Metcalf research is there's another wide receiver there, Courtland Sutton, who has probably the same measurables as DK Metcalf. He's probably not as he doesn't have probably a low body fat like DK Metcalf, but the measurables are 6'3", both almost 225 each. They both have long arms with each other. And Courtland Sutton last year with Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, that whole quarterback carousel that was happening with the Broncos, he had 7 games of under 20 yards last year. And the Seahawks commits to a run game like they're going to do this year with Kenneth Walker. That number could be just as high as Courtland Sutton's was last year. And Russell Wilson also had, as I mentioned, his efficiency. Russell Wilson had fantasy points over expectation efficiency of 31.4, while Drew Lock was looking at negative 3.4. So the efficiency downgrade plus the run commitment, probably why I won't have a lot of DK Metcalf. I mean, if we look at Courtland Sutton's last year, with Drew Lock, he only had 5.53 points per game. Like 5.53 points per game, while also seeing only 30 yards per game. So, I mean, and we're getting reports right now out of camp that Geno Smith might even beat out Drew Lock. So if Geno Smith's there with DK Metcalf, which might be a long season overall.
I got to say, though, if you look at the splits from last year, DK Metcalf actually did all right with Geno Smith. And then if it's Drew Lock, I mean, that's when Courtland Sutton had his 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. So I think there's still some hope here. I mean, there's still a ceiling for DK, just given his profile and his speed, the size, and all that stuff. But Dwayne, at wide receiver 19, how are we feeling about him? Oh, you're muted, Dwayne.
Oh, sorry. So for the last guy that we talked about, Mike Evans, my tier for Mike Evans, I have him with Keenan Allen, and it's boomers and booming offenses. I can say boomer because I'm a boomer, so it shouldn't be too offensive. Then this tier that I have DK Metcalf in with DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, ascending players we love and offenses that make us quiver in fear, right? And I mean, I think that says it all. The tier names. So, I mean, we've got the maximum quarterback ADP for the Seahawks right now is 33. So, right, nobody wants to take either of the quarterbacks that we just outlined. Projected team wins 5.5. Projected dropbacks per game. So this is me projecting it based on the coaching tendencies the last couple of season, and I exclude overtime since we can't project overtime. So this is just regular dropbacks, dropbacks to pass in a game, 35.4, one of the worst in the league. So we have a low volume offense with bad quarterback play. And oh, by the way, Tyler Lockett's not completely dead, and he's still going to get targets as well. So it's just tricky. But look, the talent is absolutely there. He's going to be 24.8 years old, 25% target share last season, 25% targets per route run, 1.94 yards per route run, despite not having Russell Wilson for, a good chunk of the season. Touchdowns per route run, one of the best in the league, 2.4% of, his routes end up in 0.024. So look, the guy's elite across every single metric. And so you're purely just betting on his talent. This would be, if he was in a good offense, this is a guy we would have ranked in the top 6. But he's a guy that's in a terrible offense. So I've got him at wide receiver 18 right now, where he is on FFPC. He's at wide receiver 16, and on Underdog, he's wide receiver 19. So I'll have some exposure, but I'm not going out of my way. Just like with any of the receivers in this tier, right? We've got so many questions. And this is what you were just talking about. This group of receivers, man, it's like there's going to be a lot of swings and misses in the middle rounds this year on receiver. It's not like what we had last year, just because of all the micro things that happen in the off season that make this macro picture. And like, even for top wide receivers that I have ranked in my number 1 tier, I only have 8 of them. I didn't force 12. There's not 12. There's 8. There's 8 guys I would rank as wide receiver 1s. And, so that's what I did. So, and that kind of, there's a trickle down effect of that, right? Through all these different tiers.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, I've got it tiered out the same way. DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, DK Metcalf. The other guy that I have in that tier is Marquise Brown. And I'm kind of just spreading myself thin across all of these guys, because some of them are going to miss, some of them are going to hit, but there's definitely an immense amount of talent in that tier. But we've talked enough about wide receivers. Let's go ahead and switch over to quarterbacks. And let's start with probably the most polarizing of all quarterbacks this year, Zach Wilson, who's currently getting drafted as QB 20, but you cannot deny the ceiling that he has. This team has done whatever they can to revamp the offense, drafted Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall. We've also got a healthy Elijah Moore coming back this year. So, Amr, start us off. QB 20, are we underrating Zach Wilson a little bit, or was his faceplant last year enough that you have just completely moved off and want nothing to do with him?
Can we say, I think maybe we're probably rating him correctly while also understanding that his faceplant last year was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, because if we look under the hood, his finishing metrics are downright awful. He's 26 in expected points per expected points. He had negative 61.9 efficiency, passing efficiency, and he only had 2 top 12 weeks. He was 29th in pass attempts. The Jets only increased their pass rate by 0.5% in the second half of 2021. Was that more of a micro of Zach Wilson? Was it more the Jets trying to just win more games? I don't know what it could be. But if they increase their pass rate in 2022 as well, I mean, that could be something you could flag plan for Zach Wilson. But even though he got Garrett Wilson, he got Bryce Hall, he got C.J. Uzomah and free agency, even with all these, I just can't trust a player who had a horrible efficiency-wise rookie season to trust him to absolutely smash and in the second year. I mean, the last time we saw a QB smash like this in the second year after having a horrible rookie efficiency was Carson Wentz. But I mean, Carson Wentz doesn't look good right now. So like, I don't know. I'm just not ending on Zach Wilson. Like yeah, he's a great late round quarterback. Because he's going right now at QB 20. But I mean, Davis Mills is going at QB 22, and I'd rather have Davis Mills than Zach Wilson.
Yeah, I will firmly agree with that I'd rather take Davis Mills at ADP. But Drew or Dwayne, what are you thinking here? I mean, is this one of those where you just go out and buy the cow? You don't know who is going to hit on the offense, so you just get the guy that's going to be supporting all of them?
I think Amr actually really just already summarized this one pretty well. Like, look, so I won't belabor it, but like the face plant that Wilson had was really bad, and the track record afterwards is not good. And even I love the Carson Wentz thing. Yeah, Carson Wentz came and had a good season, but do we really want to start Carson Wentz now, like this fantasy season? We probably have him ranked somewhere around or maybe even below Zach Wilson. So I'm really just looking at it as a tier, though. Once you get into these later quarterbacks, honestly, I'm not going to have a firm flag plant against them, because I just want some exposure, because we can be wrong and the ADP is so low. So a lot of it ends up becoming around correlation. So if I'm at the end of an underdog draft and I've got Garrett Wilson, if I'm at the end of the draft and I've got Elijah Moore, and so a lot of times the way I'm thinking about building out that second quarterback, I'm really more correlating it, to my wide receivers and tight ends, rather than just, making, and maybe that's a chicken way of doing it, no. But I'm just saying game theory is making the decision for me, guys, game theory. So, and I trade a lot of the guys the same way, like Tua, I'm doing the same thing with Trevor Lawrence, same thing there. So, even Ryan Tannehill, I'm not that excited about Tannehill this season, but if I own if I've rostered Treylon Burks, or for some reason I've got Woods or some of these other guys, or even Derrick Henry, because there's some weird ways, right, that you can think about correlation, late in the season. That's the way I'm really thinking about my QB2s, especially though, when we talk about the tier of Tua, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, all of these younger guys.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head right there, talking about just the stacking, and that's the thing is I have a ton of exposure on Zach Wilson right now, not because I like Zach Wilson, but because I love Elijah Moore and I love Garrett Wilson, and then when I'm in that 15th round, I'm like, well, I might as well, right? And so maybe I'm just tricking myself into thinking Zach Wilson can bounce back because I've already drafted so much because of his weapons. Anyway, let's stick on receiver or on quarterbacks and sticking on year two quarterbacks for that matter. Trey Lance right now is almost getting drafted as a QB1. I mean, there's still rumors out there that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to start. I don't know if anyone's buying into that at this point in the season, but he's still on the team and the team still loves him. And now Trey Lance is getting drafted as QB13. That is the highest of all year two quarterbacks. Dwayne, is it just an absolute lock that if Trey Lance starts, he is going to outscore all the other sophomore quarterbacks?
Yeah, if he starts, but the caveat is, can he start the whole season, right? If they don't get rid of Jimmy G, I think there's a scenario where he starts off poorly and Jimmy G still takes over. So I think there's risk baked in with Trey Lance, but like where you're taking him, I agree with the upside. When you look at his ability, as far as, a runner, he's going to rank in the top four or five guys in the league. We know that we've seen the Shanahans in the past, like really form a great offense around a running quarterback. We've seen that already with Robert Griffin back in the day with Washington. And that was whenever Kyle was under his dad, Mike Shanahan. So I think there is a lot of upside, with Trey Lance. But I think there's also a lot of risk with Trey Lance. But I think you just basically you get to the point, in the draft where what are you looking for? Are you looking for a guy that you think could just give you points, or do you want to take a swing on a player that if you're right, they could give you that, what the cool kids like to call league winning upside. And I don't have any doubt that Lance has that. His sample size last year is so small. I'm not going to quote you a bunch of different stats, but he can be heavily used in not just the scramble game, but in the design rushing attempts. So if you looked at him last year, whenever they had him out there, it wasn't just drop back and nothing's there, scramble. They're actually designing rush plays for Trey Lance, like what we see with Jalen Hurts, like what we see with Lamar Jackson. So he could be an arbitrage play. If he plays the whole season, he is an arbitrage play on people that are drafting Lamar Jackson in round 5, and you're getting Trey Lance in round 9, 10, and 11.
And I mean, one of the things you said, it was a very small sample size, but if you look at the points per start among rookie quarterbacks last year, Trey Lance had twice as much as any other rookie. I mean, he was just playing on a different level than the rest of them.
Per dropback, he was at 0.75 points, which is nuts. That's like Lamar Jackson level.
Yeah, and when you get those rushing touchdowns, and when you got guys that can rack up yak, I mean, it makes it easy for everybody. Let's talk about one more quarterback, and then I got a few running backs that we can wrap up with here. And the last quarterback that I want to talk about is Joe Burrow, who is getting drafted as a QB6 right now. I feel like this might be a little bit of recency bias. We just saw him in the Super Bowl. He had a red hot start or a red hot finish to the season. But Amr, without any rushing upside at all, are we drafting Burrow a little bit too high? It seems like we're kind of banking on insane efficiency and volume at this point.
I mean, we're probably going to get it again next year because, I mean, the Bengals with Joe Burrow last year, they had the second highest pass increase from the first half of the season to the second half of the season. And that probably coincides with Joe Burrow's knee getting healthier. In the first half of the season, their pass rate was 50.5% for all their plays. In the second half of the season, it was 53.8 their 53.8 pass rate. And then if you also look at from weeks 11 to 18 last year, when Joe Burrow's knee was probably his healthiest, the Bengals were 21st in plays per game, 17th in seconds per snap plays, 22nd no huddle rate, 14th highest pass percentage. So what I'm saying here is, with the team with a lot of playmakers, the passing volume wasn't nearly high enough last year for them to all smash. Now this year, if the volume actually hits, their play increase, their play speed, all that, we could actually see a more explosive Cincinnati Bengals offense in 2022.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to paint the picture that, one, he's another year removed from that, traumatic knee injury. And two, this team could pass more. I mean, both of those would work in his favor, but you're kind of hoping for one of those for him to hit at his ADP. Dwayne, before we switch over to running backs, do you have anything that you want to add on Joe Burrow?
Yeah, I think the key, though, is he also had 8.9 yards per attempt last year, which is really high. It's hard to repeat that kind of number. We'll see players do that, and they have these spike seasons. And if you're good and you play long enough, you get a few of those in your career. But to continue on that pace, and see the offense improve or, run more plays. I think it's, you need both to happen to really pay off at his current ADP. I get what people are doing. He's a young player. They added offensive linemen. I don't think many people would challenge you. They've got some of the best skill position players in the league. When you just Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, you can stop there. And we get, Tyler Boyd's also really good as a slot receiver. Like, I don't think anyone's going to argue against that, but just the pick that you have to spend on Burrow, like I'm not going to take Burrow over Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray's a one quarterback in the league could throw for 5,000 and rush for 1,000. I know he's been hurt, but I really don't care. Like, I'm looking for that big upside case. So for me with Burrow, I'm waiting. In fact, I think you can draft Kirk Cousins. I think you can draft Derek Carr, who are both teams that I think will throw the ball more than they did last year. They have pretty good weapons, and they're going to score somewhere similar to Joe Burrow, and you're going to get them much later in your draft. So I will be under the market on my exposure to Joe Burrow. Not about hating the player. It's as Ian always says over at PFF, don't hate the player, hate the ADP, and I'm out on Burrow's ADP.
Yep. And I will say that when I prepped this, these notes and sent them over to you guys a few days ago, at the time, Joe Burrow was QB6. I'm looking right now, and the market has corrected itself. Jalen Hurts has moved ahead of Joe Burrow. Jalen Hurts is now QB6. Joe Burrow is QB7. All is right in the world. Things are falling into place the way that they should. But let's go ahead and talk about running backs a little bit here. And I want to start off talking about Miami. Chase Edmonds right now is getting drafted as the RB35, which is pretty darn late in drafts, but he is getting drafted far ahead of every other Miami running back. So, Dwain, I kind of got a two-part question for you here. One, is he the lead back in Miami? And two, if he is the lead back in Miami, why the heck isn't he getting drafted a little bit higher?
I think he's the lead back in Miami. I think he's the most versatile. I think he's the most explosive. He can play on passing downs. I do think Raheem Mostert is an explosive player as well. And I think you saw that, Mike McDaniel, like, he was really trying to add, speed to his offense. And we saw him do it with Tyreek Hill. We saw him do it with Chase Edmonds, did it in the backfield with Raheem Mostert. You already had Jalen Waddle there. So I think things are starting to shape up, right? It's not going to be a high volume offense. It's going to be an offense that's based around efficiency. And that's why they're putting these types of players in it. As far as Edmonds goes, they did also add Sony Michel. You still got Myles Gaskin there. So I think there's some different things that could play out. But Edmonds is going to lead the team. Right. I'm not saying he's going to get 60% of the rushing attempts. If we look historically, at the 49ers, where McDaniel comes from, like, we've seen them have these split backfields. But we've also seen a year occasionally here or there where all of a sudden one guy does get the work, right? I think everybody remembers a guy named Arian Foster. So I think, and not to say that Chase Edmonds is Arian Foster. That's not where I'm taking this. But I think he has the broadest skill set. He's also the younger player. He's the one they paid the most. And his explosive play rate is really great. 16%, of the time his rushing attempts went for 10 yards or more. That's one of the best in the league. He's also one of the players that he hit 15 plus miles per hour, more than any other running back, I believe, in the league last year with at least 100 attempts. I have to go double check on that, but I know he was way up there if he didn't actually lead the league. So I know that that's the kind of thing that, McDaniel covets. I think the ADP, man, is the biggest thing. Like, an explosive player who catches passes, like, that's the profile I'm looking for once I get to like round 8 through 12. And so Chase Edmonds checks both of those boxes. So even if other guys are still involved, I'm willing to take him where his ADP is.
Love it. And speaking of explosive guys who catch passes, that leads right into the next guy I want to talk about, Travis Etienne. One of my favorite guys to draft every single year are guys on bad offenses that catch a lot of passes. And that's what Travis Etienne is. And I understand that there is some concern about his injury coming off that Lisfranc fracture, and that is baked into his ADP. But right now he's getting drafted at RB21. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that his range of outcomes should have RB1, RB2, RB3, like one of the top profiles in the league, just because of how many passes he could catch in his rapport with Trevor Lawrence. So, Amr, are we undervaluing Travis Etienne right now, or do you think that he's going to struggle coming off of this injury?
I'm kind of on the other side of the coin. The only reason why I'm not in on Travis Etienne as much as other people are, because there's FB Injury Doc on Twitter, Edwin, he basically said that coming back from Lisfranc, you get 87% of your full potential from previous Lisfranc injuries. So we're getting 87% of Travis Etienne from 2021. And then I was looking at Doug Pearson's track record with running backs. His leading rush attempts per season since 2013 when he was with the Kansas City Chiefs, 259 rushing attempts, 206, 160, 155, 173, 120, 179, 164. I mean, that really doesn't show that like we'll get that much work at Travis Etienne this year, especially if we don't think the Jaguars. I don't think the Jaguars take as big a step offensively as everyone else does. Only because like I understand that Urban Meyer's like the big cow in the room, like you got him off your back, but I still don't think they're going to be as good. Christian Kirk, I think, is going to be miscast as wide receiver 1, or they're going to try to force the ball to him to kind of like show that he was what they're worth. Because I think they they heard all the rumblings, all the Christian Kirk like was overpaid. I think they're gonna try to force the ball to Christian Kirk a lot to like show the value. But I'm not in on ATM this year at his price.
All right, fair enough. I want to talk about one more running back before we get off here, and that is Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, this guy has just been an RB1 every single year since he's been in the league. And I get it. He's 26 right now, so he's at that scary age for running backs. But we're drafting him as RB17 right now. Dwayne, is he going to fall off a cliff? I mean, is that age cliff approaching, or are we just crazy right now for pushing him this far down draft boards?
I'm fine with where he's going, but I will say, like, I think the risk is all baked in. We're getting to a point where, like, if James Conner and Fournette and these other guys keep going up, eventually we're going to look at Zeke and we're going to be like, is Zeke like arbitrage Fournette now? If Fournette's going in the middle of the second and you can get, Zeke at the end of the fourth or early fifth, I think there are some cases that you could make, right? I think especially on underdog, he's going to continue to fall because, it's just, what drives that market, right, is a lot of younger players that are up to date on a lot of these trends that go on with injuries and carries and all those things. So I don't think it's gonna let up on Zeke. I think more on like an FFPC type of site. I think Zeke might slowly rise, right, a little bit through the summer. But I think the biggest thing is you've got the age, you've got the deteriorating talent, which we've talked about with a few players. His missed tackles forced per attempt have gone down from 16% to 8. Well, he went from 16 to 18 to 8%. Then his explosive play rate, 13%. Down to 9%, down to 9, and stayed at 9%. And then you got his yards after contact have gone down from 3.2 to 2.8 to 2.7. So this is a player that's already showing signs of decline. And usually at this age, he's already over the 1,500 rush, threshold. He's over 2,000 touches in his career when you include playoffs and all this other stuff. So there's just a lot of red flags with Zeke. And so I get why he's being ranked where he is. I mean, but the beauty is, like, people are so soured on Zeke. Like, the ADP, I get why someone would take him. And you got to put into context, like, the receivers we've just been talking about, Dave, like, that are going in that range. Like, so I think, when you got to put up Zeke against DK Metcalf, like, who has more upside? I think we could easily say, well, Metcalf is the more talented player, way more explosive. All true. But at the end of the day, when we're just purely talking upside, like, based on like their whole situation, not just their talent, it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I mean, I could see a roster construction where I may want to go ahead and add Elliott to a few different teams. Whereas last year, when we didn't have as many questions around the receivers, I think he could have fell even further than what we're seeing this season.
Yeah, agree with everything you said there. And I want to wrap up talking about one more guy, and this is Cole Kmet. And I'm going to try my best not to let my Bears fandom show here. So don't pay attention to this Brian Urlacher bobblehead up here. But right now, Cole Kmet's getting drafted as tight end 18. I mean, this is a year 3 guy when we always see tight ends take their biggest leaps. With them losing Allen Robinson, losing Jimmy Graham, adding nobody of consequence in the draft or free agency, I can't help but feel like Cole Kmet is stepping into 100 to 120 targets this year. Dwayne, start us off here, and then I'll let Amr wrap up here. But is my Bears fandom showing, or is this a logical take here?
Well, I mean, I think you're looking at, you're looking at the high end, right, of the range of outcomes for Kmet, but I think they're fair, right? So I mean, every player's got this range of outcomes, and as Adam Harstead says, like, it's really like every player has this wider range of outcomes than what most people think. But it's like, what do we think Cole Kmet is? Like, around the 70th percentile of his outcomes, right? I think what you probably gave is a little higher than that, but to your point, wide receiver 3, I mean, third year tight end, you look at his targets per route run have gone from 16 to 18%. The threshold I'm really looking for my tight ends to get to is 20%. Like, the elites, just to give people context, like Kelsey, Andrews, they're up in the 24, 25% targets per route run. So Kmet, though, advancing each year, 16% to 18%. His yards per route run went up from 0.94 to 1.23. So look, it's a second round player going into his third season. He's improved each of his first 2 seasons in the league. You mentioned the Bears depth chart. Like, I also do not, if I got to put a chip down today, Darnell Mooney's going to see the most targets. I would put my second chip on Cole Kmet. I don't think it's going to be Velus Jones. I don't think it's going to be Byron Pringle. If I've got to put a chip down, I think Kmet is the number 2 option in the Bears offense. I think the number 3 option actually could end up being, Montgomery and the running backs. Like we'll see how it all plays out. But yeah, I like Kmet for the reasons you mentioned. And like, ADP is not bad, man, for a third year receiver, for a third year tight end.
Yeah. The one thing I'll point out, I just dug this up the other day, but Cole Kmet is the second tight end in NFL history to see more than 130 targets and less than 3 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons. I mean, his touchdown rate has been historically awful. And I think a lot of that had to do with Matt Nagy, who would just pull him off the field and put Jimmy Graham in as soon as they got into the red zone. The one other guy to do that was drafted by Cincinnati in 1993, Tony McGee, and he had 14 touchdowns over his next 3 seasons. So you've got to hope that the positive regression is coming for Cole Kmet.
Yeah, his touchdowns per route run, 0.004 over his first 2 seasons. Just the average NFL tight end is 0.010. The average tight end 4 to 6 is a 0.014, right? So like quadruple almost where Kmet is. Even if he's a low end tight end between 7 and 12, tight end 1, it's 0.013. So, I mean, yeah, he should easily, like, even if the Bears don't get that much better on offense, like, I think you can expect to see him triple that.
Yeah, and I mean, this guy was, like you said, an average touchdown rate away from finishing as a tight end 1 last year. And I just can't help but feel like he's one of the best values out there right now. But I want to thank both of you guys so much for your time. Let's go ahead and sign off here. But before we do that, Amr, let everyone know where they can find you on social media one more time and what you are going to be working on here.
You guys can find me on Twitter. My name is Amr Gabr. I know it's weird. Someone else took my actual real name, but whatever. But you can find me on 4for It. I'm going to be writing a lot of best ball content this year. I was really excited to do the show with you guys, and thanks again for having me.
Of course. Dwayne, let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, I already said it earlier in the show, so I won't spend much time, but you can check me out over at PFF. Like I said, I will have a new article coming out tomorrow, actually around breakout wide receivers, looking at what are some of the indicators that even when a wide receiver doesn't have a top 3 finish in their pass, because that's typically the easiest way we can predict that they're eventually going to finish as a wide receiver 1. So even the guys that miss that, like there are some indicators that we can be looking for that could tip us off as to who could have a wide receiver 1 season coming.
Love it. Follow these guys on Twitter, read everything they put out, listen to everything they put out, because you are going to be a better fantasy player from doing it. I'm Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. I'm going to be off the next few weeks as I'm recovering from a surgery, but I will see you sometime in mid-June. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. That's Dave Kluge. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys. On the right side of your screen, you'll see some of our other videos. You'll see where you can subscribe and all of those fun things. Be sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the show, and I'll see you in a few weeks.